What are some of the most clever genius crimes ever committed? Story 1. The 1976 bank robbery in Nice, France. They tunneled into the vault on the Bastille Day long weekend, stole over 40 million francs worth of cash, securities and valuables, and spray-painted sans armes, ni haine, ni violence, without weapons, neither hatred nor violence, on the wall. The leader was caught, and during his trial, he jumped out of the window, landed on a car, got on the back of a waiting motorcycle, and disappeared. Story 2. A guy dressed like a road maintenance worker robs a cash truck outside of a bank. But prior to this, he put an ad on Craigslist offering work for $28/hour, and anyone interested had to show up at the bank wearing the same road maintenance attire. A dozen guys, all unwitting decoys, were milling about the parking lot as the robber escaped on an inner tube floating down a nearby river. Here's an article. Story 3. Pretty horrific but also bizarrely complex was the assassination of Kim Jong-nam, the elder brother of North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un. The two assassins didn't know they were being trained to kill anybody. They were hired on as talent for a prank-based TV show. Their signature pranks were to run up on people in public with hand sanitizer on their hands and wipe it on someone's face. Then they'd go, "Sorry," and run away giggling. The other gal would run up and spray cologne on the prank target and similarly run off. They were trained after a successful prank to immediately discard of the supplies, wash their hands and change clothes if I recall correctly, then disappear into the public crowd and regroup elsewhere to film another one. Anyway, this went on for some time, just a harmless prank show, until it wasn't. Kim Jong-nam came in through the airport on his way to take his kids for some very Western vacation time, like I think they were on their way to Disneyland. He was very different from the rest of the dynasty back home. He was disinterested in politics and brought shame to his family with an untoward interest in Western lifestyles and entertainment. So he was kind of sneaking through. He was trying to keep this trip on the down low. Anyway, here come our ersatz pranksters to play their tricks. Only this time, the hand sanitizer and cologne are two parts of a deadly nerve toxin that, once combined on his face, killed him in minutes. The two would-be TV stars scattered, washed their hands, disposed of the supplies, just as they always had. They get caught by CCTV, and the whole affair's just crazy. I probably have all the details wrong, so check out this instead. Story 4. The McDonald's Monopoly Scam. The head of security of the marketing company that helped McDonald's administer their famous Monopoly game led a scheme where he stole the winning pieces and with a group of people helped cheat the company out of like $24 million over the course of several years. He was responsible for carrying the winning pieces in a sealed package and taking them to packaging centers where he was responsible for applying the winners to soda cups and fry packages that were going to be sent out to McDonald's that had already been randomly selected by a computer. Basically, he was accidentally sent a bunch of tamper-proof seals that allowed him to swap out the winning pieces that he was responsible for carrying with non-grand prize ones. He dodged the auditor by hiding in an airport bathroom and doing the swap there. Then he'd do his job as usual, but sent the losing tickets out while he pocketed the winners. He'd then get his friends and family to help find people to claim the winning prize for a promise of splitting the money. Eventually, the feds got a tip about one of the winners and noticed that there was an unusual cluster of winners of the game in states like Florida and Georgia, where the guy and his family lived. Remember, the tickets were supposed to go out to random destinations around the U.S. Several people got arrested. Story 5. There was a parking attendant who collected the parking fees for a public zoo. He worked there for decades. One day, he just stopped showing up. After a few days, they called the city and said the parking attendant quit and they needed to hire a new one. The city told them that it didn't cost any money to park on that lot. Not a great crime, but clever. Guy I grew up with was a grade school dropout. Got himself a tow truck. Bid cheap for the contract to service rental cars at a certain airport. Okay, EWR. Back in the day, cars had distributors. When this guy needed money, he just pulled the distributor wire on a rental car or two. This resulted in a call to him to tow and fix said vehicle, which he happily did, sending the rental car company a fat bill for complex repairs when all he had to do was plug in the wire. He worked this scam 4 years. Story, I'm not sure what year this happened, but prob within the last 50 years. A number of people received a letter in the mail predicting the outcome of a sporting event. Amazingly, the prediction came true. Not much later, they received a second letter predicting the outcome of another sporting event, and it too was correct. Then a third letter, and the same thing. Then they received a fourth letter, and it said that for X amount of dollars, the recipient would be told the outcome of another sporting event. Many people sent in the money but never received the prediction. The way the criminals did it was they started with a large number of people, then sent half of them one prediction and half of them another. Whichever group's prediction came true, they sent a second letter, and so on. I always thought that was a pretty clever scam. Story 7. Now I know this plan is foolproof. Check this out. First of all, you and me start working at the bank. Doesn't matter the position, okay? Just so long as we get in there, all right? Then we just go there every day, do the work, gain their trust, until we get them in the palm of our hand. All right, so how we get the money, that's the beauty of it, bro. They deposit the money into our bank accounts week after week, month after month. They're not even going to know they're being robbed. And then 20 or 30 years later, we walk out the front door like nothing even happened. Story 8. I break into Tiffany's at midnight. Do I go for the vault? No, I go for the chandelier. It's priceless. As I'm taking it down, a woman catches me. She tells me to stop. It's her father's business. She's Tiffany. I say no. We make love all night. In the morning, the cops come and I escape in one of their uniforms. I tell her to meet me in Mexico, but I go to Canada. I don't trust her. Besides, I like the cold. 30 years later, I get a postcard. I have a son, and he's the chief of police. This is where the story gets interesting. I tell Tiffany to meet me by the Trocadero in Paris. She's been waiting for me all these years. She's never taken another lover. I don't care. I don't show up. I go to Berlin. That's where I stashed the chandelier. Story 9. Older days, fabulous crime. Blanket deposit tickets were always on counters. You filled in your account number and name. Some genius took a bunch of blank deposit tickets and used the MyCR machine, the black coating on the bottom of the deposit ticket that was read by their machine, to encode his account number on all of them. For a number of days, all deposits went straight into his account, and he moved the monies elsewhere each day. Clever. Story 10. So in my opinion, yeah, it has to be the Great Train Robbery in 1963. Believe me, it was wild. A group of guys in the UK stopped a Royal Mail train and managed to steal like 2.6 million pounds, equivalent to tens of millions now. They used insider info, messed with the signals to stop the train, and executed it like a heist movie. Not condoning it, obviously, but it was a pretty insane plan for its time. Story 11. Diamond heist at Gas on Diamonds in Amsterdam in 2001. Bloke worked at the store and noticed that he got a lot of trust when handling diamonds with little oversight. So one day, he simply walked in with an empty microwave box and took it to the back, loaded the box with millions worth of diamonds, and walked out the front door, all the while greeting colleagues and customers, never to be seen again. Story 12. The most genius and clever ones are the ones you don't know about. But two of the most genius criminals that did get caught are Al Capone and Ted Kaczynski. Al Capone got bagged on tax evasion, not bootlegging, not racketeering, not extortion, not murder, not blackmail. Tax evasion. His criminal system was so well designed he was effectively insulated from being held accountable for anything. Ultimately, the only thing they could nail him on was not paying taxes on his illegal income. Ted Kaczynski was extremely intelligent. Unhinged, yes, but also extremely intelligent. He made something like 16 improvised explosive devices using very basic tools and materials. People had no clue who he was, and the only reason they got a lead on him was when his manifesto got published. His brother happened to read it and recognized the stylistic prose and tipped off the FBI that he thought it might be Ted. How tenuous is that for a lead? Hey, the way this guy writes reminds me of my brother. You guys should check that out. If his brother had not read the publication and recognized the prose as familiar, the Unabomber may not have been caught. Story 13. One guy found a payment glitch in an online black market back in 2012, leading to the largest Bitcoin theft in history. He stole over 50K Bitcoins, worth $3.4 billion today, and managed to hide for years using crypto mixers that made all his Bitcoin transfers practically untraceable. Story 14. I used to work in IT in central London. A story went around about a team of guys pulling up to a very large financial institution's offices one night in a couple of brand new matching transit vans, the occupants getting out, all in matching overalls and high-vis vests, and explaining to the night watchman that they were there to do some out-of-hours IT work. They then calmly walked into the IT department, disconnected several £100,000 worth of kit, loaded it into the back of the vans, and drove off. Between looking completely above board and having some convincing bogus paperwork, apparently the security guy didn't bat an eyelid, and it was only next morning that it came to light. Story 15. In 1989, a robbery occurred at the armored car outside of a bank in Minnesota. As a guard was loading money, three armed men subdued him. Then, a van drove in front of the armored car, and another man put a bomb on the hood and threatened to detonate it. After the thieves fled, the bomb squad was called in to defuse the bomb. They found it was a fake. In under a minute, the thieves took over $1 million and vanished. Police believe it was related to a similar crime that occurred in 1986 in Maryland that also used a fake bomb. Edit. Typo fix related, not relegated. Silly autocorrect. Story 16. The world's littlest skyscraper. In the 1910s, there was an oil boom happening around Wichita Falls, Texas, and there was a massive influx of people. J.D. McMahon saw an opportunity and announced that he would build a high-rise building downtown to accommodate the rising population. He put together blueprints for what everyone thought would be a 480-feet skyscraper, one of the tallest in the world at the time. He gathered up enough investors to collect $200,000, roughly $3.5 million in today's money, started building a tiny building about 3 stories tall using his own construction crew, and pocketed the remaining cash. Naturally, all of the investors tried to sue him to get their money back, but on all of the legal documents and on all the signed-off blueprints, he had the building listed as 480 inches instead of 480 feet. And he had built 480 building. A local judge declared it legally binding, and McMahon skipped town with all the remaining cash prior to the end of construction. The only portion of their investment the investors recovered was from the elevator company, which refused to honor the contract after learning how small the building was. The Newbie McMahon building is still standing in downtown Wichita Falls today. Story 17. There's some really clever scams out there. Unwitting person finds an unusually cheap item on eBay and purchases the item. It is a listing posted by a scammer. Scammer purchases the item with a stolen card number and sends it to the recipient. Scammer receives payment from the buyer. Stolen card owner either files a charge back or doesn't notice, and we all pay for it in the form of higher prices on goods and higher transaction fees. Story 18. A friend of my brother's named Dave habitually ditched high school. One winter, we got a pretty good snowstorm, and his dad made him shovel the sidewalk before he left for school. Dave told his dad to write him a note because he was going to arrive late. Dave threw away the note, rewriting it and signing his dad's name in his own handwriting. He finished shoveling and then took the new note to school and handed it in to the school office. Since Dave was a known ditcher and the note looked like it was written by a teenage boy, they called his dad, who backed up Dave's story, saying, "Didn't he show you my note?" The office ladies then put the forged note on file, and anytime Dave wanted an excuse for whatever, he just wrote himself a note that exactly matched what they had on file. Story 19, the Spider-Man of Paris. Dude stole 5 paintings worth over 100 £100 from museum in Paris and did it like it's nothing. In interview, he said he was surprised how poor and the security of the museum was. He checked side windows and broke in them easily. He casually walked out the gallery with 5 different paintings and walked with them across the street to his car in the middle of night. People of Paris actually find him interesting because he is not violent and doesn't kill or use aggression, and for his crazy walking and climbing across very high walls and rooftops. Before pulling the big heist, he did some smaller robberies, like breaking into rich people's apartments and stealing small things like jewelry. Not once he threatened, hurt, or killed someone. He comes from my place and was a good friend of my dad. One woman from my neighborhood said he stole the art and gave the money to the poor, which wouldn't surprise me. Story 20. I used to call the operator on a payphone near my house and say I put like $3 in and the phone wouldn't work. They'd try to return the change, but there wasn't any to return. So they'd offer to send me a check for the amount I lost in the payphone. Then for a few days I'd check the mail for the letter from @&T or whoever. When it showed up, I'd take it to my dad and he'd cash my check for $2.75. I did it probably a dozen times. I was a 13-year-old criminal mastermind sticking it to the phone companies. Unfortunately, my dad was an innocent patsy. The things a fat kid'll do for a candy bar. Story 21. When I first became an attorney, I had to do a lot of appointed criminal defense work in municipal court. 90% was people stealing from Walmart, mostly just forgetting to scan certain things at the self-checkout. However, one time, and I can honestly say the most ingenious crime I've seen, there was this guy who would grab a 0.59-cent Kool-Aid packet and then palm it while he scanned all kinds of expensive stuff. I really thought that was about genius-level thinking. Story 22. Arno Funke alias Dagobert. He blackmailed stores for money. He planted smoke bombs in the stores, which ignited at night. The fire suppression systems destroyed the items in the shop, so they agreed to pay him money. On one occasion, he ordered the money to be put into a box at the end of a train. The police figured out that the box is attached to the train and will be dropped by a timing mechanism, so the police waited at the spot where the train would be when the time runs out. However, the timing mechanism was just a distraction. Arno hid an RC receiver in the box and used a remote to detach it earlier than expected. Another time, he put a small layer of concrete over the entrance to a rainwater channel and put a box over it. When the money was put in, he waited a bit and then broke through the concrete from underneath and took it. Sadly for him, in both cases, the police used fake money. Story 23. Attempting to overturn the 2020 election while lying about the outcome and successfully stealing classified national security documents and getting away with it, all the while tricking millions in the process. A higher crime against America and democracy and the Constitution has never been committed and never will. It's the greatest, worst crime against America ever. The Supreme Court Republicans failed us all. The Republican Congress failed us all. The media and their owners failed us all. The bad guys won, and the effects will last ages. If we ever recover. Story 24. The Great Canadian Maple Syrup Heist is in the top 10 in stolen goods by value to ever be stolen anywhere in the world. A guy worked at a maple syrup storage facility over the course of years, and the only reason anyone found out is that one day on inspection, an engineer saw that some of the barrels were sweating. They had replaced the syrup with water. Now, maple syrup is considered a valuable limited resource in Canada because maple trees take decades to grow to the point where they can produce a significant quantity of sap without dying, and even adult trees can die from overharvesting. In order to prevent this, the government buys all of the syrup produced every year and stores the surplus at pre-decided rates. This creates a surplus on years with good harvests, which is stored in a maple syrup storehouse. As of 5 years ago, it was estimated that tens of millions of dollars of syrup sales in the USA is sourced from black market syrup every year. They never caught the people who did it. Story 25. The original equipment for the Timmit titanium plant in Henderson, NV, was a wartime English plant transported to Nevada. The electrical switchgear was also English. In the early 90s, after 50 years of operation, the switchgear was dismantled and new gear installed. All of the metal bus bars inside the gear were dismantled and placed on pallets. One 4-foot section took 2 men to carry. Eventually, 6 pallets were stacked outside, and the electricians were told they were going to be recycled. One Saturday, a pickup truck with salvage spray painted on the doors came to the plant with a bill of sale, loaded up all the bus bars, and limped off. The following Monday, the plant was locked down with police, FBI, and MI6 agents. The bus bars were solid platinum. Britain had made the bus bars out of their then strategic supply and smuggled them out of the country in case Hitler invaded. To anyone's knowledge, the thief was never caught. The salvage truck was located a week later, burnt to the ground. According to the electricians who disassembled the gear, there was close to 2 tons worth of metal. Roughly $61 million in platinum disappeared. I personally don't know if any of it was ever recovered. Story 26. Running a private health insurance firm, banking in general. In the US, military spending, which is essential a subsidy to high tech. Look at your average smartphone, entirely, except for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, funded by public dollars, but through the magic of profit capture, public-private partnerships, held out to be extremely expensive devices. Don't get me started on pharma. Story 27, the ones we haven't even heard about. Probably one of the most intriguing crimes, in my opinion, is the Transylvania University book heist in 2004. Essentially, a college student at Transylvania University in Lexington, Kentucky, discovered that the library contained a collection of rare and extremely valuable books. A lot of libraries have a special collections section, usually apart from the rest of the library in a room with strict air quality control. He discovered that there was practically no security, save for one secretary and a sign-in sheet. After traveling to New York and later Amsterdam to arrange a buyer, he set up an almost Hollywood-style heist with several friends, initially planning to disguise themselves as old men, but later abandoning that attempt. On their second attempt, They successfully got away with a bunch of volumes with a total value of $5.7 million. They got as far as attending an appointment with the New York office of Christie's to obtain an official valuation. They were eventually tracked down and caught by the FBI. Of note is that this is one of the earlier cases that set the standard for internet media enterprises, in this case, Yahoo, among others, cooperating with law enforcement in investigations. The FBI eventually matched the suspect's social media pictures with security camera footage of their meeting at Christie's. Also, this case changed the way libraries secured their special collections. I believe Transylvania University now requires biometric identification, all visitors to be escorted at all times, and positive verification of identification through the university police. Story 28. My high school friend's father was a pretty brilliant con, with an MD, and served as a state Supreme Court justice for a while. We were chatting on his sun porch one afternoon, and he told me how he robbed a very popular regional bank out of $400K. He was under investigation and decided to get out of the country with his family, so he borrowed that amount to finance their travel and lives for a while. They moved to another country, and he claims he sent postcards back to the bank, saying he was having a great time and thanks for the money. He was funny as hell. He made no loan payments. It goes into default, and he puts himself through med school in the foreign country, returning to the U.S. 5 years later. Since he was already being investigated for the bank involved the feds, and the feds took it on because he was out of the country. I think the statute of limitations for the fraud was 4 years, but only goes into effect when the person is in the country. If they leave the country, the timer doesn't start until they return. He moves the whole family back to the same city they left, and he's in custody within 12 hours. While being questioned, he tells the feds that they need to go to the courthouse and check his file. Before he left the country, he filed a simple form naming an agent to render services while he was out of the country. This means that his agent was responsible for any financial legal affairs, and the statute of limitations was never suspended and had thus expired. He gambled that they would never bother to check that. It was fun to hear this all firsthand. That was the only conversation I had with him. Edit. Not sure why the NSFW tag was applied to this. Story 29. A guy in Springfield, Mass. robbed a bank in a wheelchair. He got the money and left, then proceeded to circle the block, passing the police many times. Nobody told the police he was in a wheelchair. Long story a little shorter. It was winter and freezing cold. He wanted to get arrested because he had just been released from prison and wanted to go back where it was warm and had food. Story 30. My parents made me give the money back, but I robbed almost all of my classmates as a third grader. We took a trip as a class across a bit of the Mississippi River in a ferry boat. This was in the spring, so everyone's on deck enjoying the weather, watching the water. I go down some steps I find and notice that there's a food court area with ridiculously low prices, a nickel for a soda, a quarter for a refill, quarter pizza slices, quarter candy, the cheapest prices I've ever seen. I go back upstairs and a kid that I hated saw what I got and told me to go grab him some pizza. He gave me a $5 and asked how much the pizza was. I said $2. I went and got it for him. Another kid overheard and didn't want to go downstairs, so they had me get something too. That was another few bucks. Even the kids that didn't like me thought I was too naive to rob them. I ended up with $42. No one wanted to go downstairs to look for themselves. I started the trip with $10, so the $42 was hard to hide, and I decided when I'd get home, I'd put all the money into a sock under my bed. Spring cleaning happened. My parents found the sock and assumed at first that I stole it from them, told them I didn't. Actually, it was from my classmates, and a large-scale refund happened the following Monday. Story 31. 3 disgruntled employees at Initech are fed up with their mundane jobs and incompetent bosses that they decide to take matters into their own hands and get even with the company. They devise a plan to embezzle a small amount of money from Initech by manipulating the company's accounting system. They write a virus that redirects a tiny fraction of each transaction into a bank account. However, due to a mundane detail, the virus ends up siphoning off a much larger sum of money than they intended. As the situation escalates, the 3 employees find themselves in a desperate situation, facing the possibility of going to prison. Milton, a socially awkward and long-neglected employee, has his own grievances and sets the building on fire. The blaze consumes the evidence of the embezzlement before the company can uncover the missing money. Story 32. The Hatton Garden heist is coming up on 10 years ago. That was described by a lawyer on the case as the largest theft in UK legal history. 6 elderly men dressed as gas repair workers got in through a fire escape, abseiled down a lift shaft, and spent a 4-day Easter holiday weekend drilling through the vault wall of a safety deposit company vault. They stole the contents of 70 deposit boxes and got away. They were eventually arrested based on CCTV footage and their existing criminal records. But only £4 million of the £14 million worth of cash, gold, and jewels was ever recovered. Story 33. Honestly, one of the craziest ones I've ever read about is the Copenhagen heist, 1995. A group of thieves managed to steal a $1 million shipment of pharmaceuticals by posing as delivery drivers. They intercepted the real delivery van, handed the driver fake paperwork, and drove off with the goods. No violence, no mess, just pure deception. It took investigators weeks to realize what even happened. Another insane one? The Stuxnet cyber attack. Okay, it's not a traditional crime, but it's genius level. Hackers created a computer worm that specifically targeted Iranian nuclear facilities, sabotaging their centrifuges. It was so sophisticated it disguised itself and left no trace of who was behind it. Allegedly some governments, though. Imagine having the brains to pull off something that literally rewrites code in real time. Story 34. SWIFT is a company that manages transactions between banks, especially between different countries. Instead of a bank having connections to each and every other bank, they just have a connection to SWIFT. In these, transactions can have a value of more digits than usual, think more or less than half a cent. But SWIFT only transfers cents and up. They round 0.5 up and less than 0.5 down. One IT guy made a change where all down-rounded amounts were sent to his account. With less than 0.5 cent per half of all transactions, that is not much. But with tens of millions of transactions per day, it quickly adds up. One day he did not show up for work and the company started an investigation. They have never found him. Story 35. I like the story of Odalisque in Red Pants by Matisse. A Miami art dealer gets a call. Someone wants to sell him the painting on the QT. He calls the museum it is hanging in Caracas, Venezuela. So the museum investigates and discovers that someone had removed the original painting and put a replica in its place, leaving it to be exhibited as if it were the real thing. No one had noticed that a fake was hanging there, and no one is sure when the switcheroo took place. When this was all discovered in 2002, they could only say the fake had been hanging in the museum for at least 2 years. They know because a photograph taken in September 2000 shows President Hugo Chavez standing in the museum in front of the fake Matisse, which is more cartoonish and brightly colored than the original. That is the earliest confirmed date for the switch. Anyway, the Miami guy keeps the crooks on the hook. They fly in from Mexico with the original, and the FBI arrests them and recovers the painting. The seller only says she has had the painting in her possession for several years. Story 36. This happened in my small town a couple decades ago, and I don't have an article for it. There's a parade once a year for FFA, Future Farmers of America, and it used to go all the way through town, essentially cutting off one side from the other for those couple hours. The police station is on the south side of that cutoff, and a bank is on the north side. Some people decided to rob the bank, and the only way for the police to get there was to go the wrong way to the freeway, which only had a southbound on-ramp, go all the way to the next exit with a northbound entrance, flip around, then take the northern exit, just to go south to get to the bank. Essentially, this created a 10-15-minute buffer for the robbers. Ever since that incident, they cut off a one-block section of the parade route to allow them to respond without having to do that huge detour. Story 37, The Heist of the Century, orchestrated by Leonardo Notarbartolo and eventually documented in the book Flawless. Valentine's weekend 2003, a group of thieves broke into an allegedly airtight vault in the international diamond capital of Antwerp, Belgium, and make off with over $100 million in diamonds and other valuables, without tripping an alarm or injuring a single guard in the process. While the heist was flawless, the getaway was not. One stroke of bad luck after another, couple of minor ups, and everybody, I think, eventually gets caught. It's an excellent read. Story 38. Some of the tactics and methods deployed by the Unabomber were quite brilliant. He'd mail his devices from public mailboxes in cities far from home. He'd carefully construct the bombs from materials that could never be traced. He'd travel far from home and collect hairs from truck stop restrooms and carefully place one in a bomb so as to cast blame on a random person who could never be connected to him. He went on the lam long before he ever committed a crime, essentially living as a fugitive, hiding in the woods, before anyone would even be looking for him. He disappeared and became a ghost, then began committing crimes. If he'd never demanded that his ridiculous nutcase manifesto be published, it is unlikely he'd ever have been caught. He'd be like the Zodiac Killer. I speak of these things not because I admire him in any way, as I most definitely do not. He murdered innocent people. However, I do have to acknowledge his tactical brilliance. Story 39. A guy down the street had his generator stolen while he was home one night, and it was running, powering part of the house. The thief caused a slight distraction by first starting the dude's lawnmower in the shed where everything was. So, while the power to the house did cut when the generator was unplugged and stolen, there was still the sound of an engine running, causing the homeowner to first check all the connections and breaker at the house before investigating the actual generator outside. Story 40 years back, there were blank deposit slips at the bank. If you forgot to bring your checkbook, this was in the distant past when we had checkbooks and walked uphill both ways to school and crashed our computers by hand because Windows had not been invented. You young'uns wouldn't understand. But where was I? Oh yeah, I remember. So if you didn't have your own deposit slip, you could use one of the blank ones. So Mr. or Ms. Clever printed up a bunch of their own, except the code at the bottom was to put the money in their own account. They just gathered a bunch of deposits over a couple of days, took all the money out in cash, and closed the account, which, surprise, surprise, was not traceable to them. Nobody knows who they were. Probably didn't even have to leave town. Story 41. I think an honorable mention goes to the theft of the Stone of Scone. In ancient times, the Stone of Scone was used as a coronation seat for kings of Scotland, until 1296, when Edward I took it back to London during the First War of Scottish Independence. It was then kept in Westminster and used for a similar purpose for English kings, as Edward wanted to claim lordship over Scotland as well as England. Then on Christmas Day in 1950, a group of students broke into Westminster Abbey, stole the stone, and brought it back to Scotland in an elaborate and mostly improvised plot that stretched over 2 weeks. 4 months later, it was left anonymously on the altar of a Broth Abbey. The 4 students ended up confessing, but were never charged due to the amount of strong feeling from Scotland. Due in part to this, the stone was returned to Scotland permanently in 1996, where it has lived ever since, except for King Charles's coronation in 2022. Story 42. I read about a guy up in Canada who got a clipboard and stopped people on the sidewalk for a few weeks, saying that the city was doing a test of how many calls the 911 switchboard could handle. This was before smartphones and cell phones and all that. So for weeks, he gets a lot of people to sign up to call 911 at 5 p.m. on Friday, January 16th or whatever. Then on Friday, January 16th at 5 p.m., he robbed a bank that had all the payroll deposits for a whole bunch of companies, but the cops never got the news because it was buried under the 600 phone calls that suddenly lit up the switchboard at 5 p.m. He got away with it too. He left the bank and hopped on a ferry to the mainland, and no one ever saw him again. Story 43. I once scammed Dell out of an expensive DLP data projector. I bought a used one on eBay for over $700 and it worked great. However, one day pixels started dropping out rapidly. Turns out the color wheel needed replacing. I called up Dell and it turns out it was still under warranty. However, the warranty was only good for the initial purchaser, not some random who bought one on eBay. The lady I spoke to said unless I could tell her the name of the original organization, I couldn't get it replaced under warranty. I asked for a clue, and she said that it belonged to a school. As luck would have it, I had a part-time job at a school at the time. I called from the school, told them that our fancy data projector was failing, and they organized a courier to come out and replace it free of charge. I then boxed up the projector as instructed and left it at the front desk, telling the admin staff that a courier was going to pick the box up and leave another box for me. There was a bit of suspicion from Dell. Why are you calling from School X when it was originally purchased by School Y? Oh, you know the Department of Education, always moving resources around. And lucky you are calling today, the warranty runs out in 3 days. Yeah, that is lucky that the most expensive component of one of your products just happens to fail just as the warranty is due to expire. Used that data projector for a few more years until it died from the same problem. I didn't work at the school anymore, so I had to buy another used Dell. They have more lumens than any comparable model at that price. Data projector with actual money. Story 44. The Great Train Robbery in 1963. A gang of robbers using a fake signal to stop a train managed to steal a lot of money. The mastermind behind it was never fully caught. Another interesting one is the story of the D.B. Cooper hijacking in 1971. He jumped out of a plane with $200,000 in cash and vanished without a trace, never to be found. Why is this a clever crime? Think about how did that person survived. Only geniuses can do a plan like that. Story 45. In 1994, local meteorologists and weatherman Phil Connors robbed an armored car by simply walking by and picking up a bag of cash while the guards were distracted with their duties. He had spent years, day after day, observing their routine so that he knew the exact moment to walk by and pick up the bag. He carried out this same method day after day for untold years, and the guards never caught on. Story 46, 1976, Montreal. A moving truck stop in front of a Brinks truck and a white van parked behind. A guy with sunglasses tap on the driver window, then point toward the truck. In the back is two guys kneeling next to an anti-aircraft gun. The driver, knowing he's not getting away, let the other in. The truck with the unharmed driver that was handcuffed to the seat was later found abandoned on Nuns Island. $2.8 million stolen. Nobody know who did it, but they suspected the West End gang. 8 people affiliated with the West End gang were later arrested with money traced to the heist in their possession. Story 47. A gang of 15 criminals led by mastermind Bruce Reynolds managed to steal £2.6 million, equivalent to about £50 million today, from a Royal Mail train in England. The criminals meticulously planned the robbery for months, learning the timetable and gaining inside information. They managed to overpower the train driver and signalman, switched the train onto a track where they could intercept it, and loaded the money onto their vehicles without attracting attention. Despite the scale of the heist, none of the gang used guns, and there was little violence. Story 48. In the late 60s in Tokyo, a bank started receiving bomb threats. They increased security, but everybody was still a little on edge. Back then, the bank would send out cars with large amounts of money to distribute to companies so they could pay their employees. Sometime after these threats started coming in, one of these cars was pulled over by a policeman on a motorcycle who informed them that the bank manager's house had been bombed and that they had reason to believe that the car they were in had another bomb planted on it. He got under the car to check, and smoke started pouring out from the undercarriage. The employees quickly took cover behind a wall and waited for the explosion. But it never happened. When they finally peeked around the wall, the car was gone, the cop was gone, and the money was gone. 300 million yen. Nobody was ever caught. Story 49. One that comes to my mind is the D.B. Cooper case. In 1971, a man hijacked a plane, demanded $200,000 in ransom, and then parachuted out of the plane somewhere over the Pacific Northwest, disappearing without a trace. Despite extensive investigations, Cooper was never found, and no one knows how he pulled off such a daring escape. Story 50. He ended up getting caught, but he led the police on for years. Arno Funke, aka Dagobert, Scrooge McDuck in German, was an extortionist and bomber. His first job was in 1988. He would plant bombs to go off when the store was closed and no customers present, then threaten to set them off if he wasn't paid. He would set up elaborate collection devices to try and get the money, including lockers with false bottoms, a box connected to a wire that seemingly the money to the other side of a lake. It actually just circled around and ended up under the original dock, and several that involved trains. He was almost caught once but was spared when an officer slipped on leaves. Very long story short, he was eventually caught in 1994. He spent 6 years in jail and became an author after being released. Story 51. Some of the most clever crimes in history involve mind-boggling creativity and planning. For example, the 1952 Great Train Robbery in the UK involved a gang that meticulously planned to steal £2.6 million, equivalent to around £53 million today, from a moving train. They even had an inside man who helped them disable the signals, and they used a fake signal box to cover their tracks. Another notorious example is the D.B. Cooper hijacking in 1971. The man, who was never caught, parachuted out of a plane with $200,000 in ransom money, vanishing without a trace and leaving authorities puzzled for decades. Then there's the story of the Banco Central burglary in Brazil in 2005. A group of thieves dug a tunnel over 78 meters long, directly into the vault of the bank, and made off with around $70 million. They spent months working on the tunnel without raising suspicion, even renting a property to cover up their activities. These crimes stand out not just for their scale, but for the level of ingenuity involved. Story 52. So here's how it went down in my office. This whole thing started with Jake, the IT guy. You know the type. Always kind of quiet, always lurking behind his computer, fixing things no one really asks him to. One day he pulls me aside, looking all casual, and says, "Hey, the finance department is rolling out this new software update. They need a couple of us to test it out. It'll just take a minute and you'll get some company rewards points for your trouble. Might even help you get a free lunch." I didn't think twice. Downloaded the update, filled out a quick survey, and moved on with my day. No big deal. But then, things started to get weird. A few days later, there were all these small discrepancies in the accounting system. Odd charges, strange points showing up in the company reward system. Everyone just shrugged it off as another glitch. That's when it sent out a notice about unusual network activity. It turns out that the software update Jake had us install wasn't a patch at all. It was a virus that skimmed fractions of a penny from every transaction. At first, it was too small to notice, just a few cents here and there. But after a while, those little pennies started adding up to millions. Jake had somehow gotten everyone to install the virus. No one even knew it was happening. Hell, even the finance team had no idea. By the time anyone realized, Jake had already taken a little vacation. I think he knew things were about to hit the fan. The company launched an investigation, but by then the damage was done. Millions were gone, and Jake was long gone too. Probably sipping margaritas on some beach with his stolen cash. Meanwhile, we all got stuck in a few extra security briefings, some uncomfortable meetings with HR, and of course more team-building nonsense. It was just like the time they told us the new server upgrade was coming, but, you know, way more expensive. Story 53. There was this guy that worked for Amazon in the accounting department for a few years. He quit his job and started forging invoices he knew Amazon would get from working there, but changed it to his bank account. So he kept sending them in, and Amazon paid him the invoices. This went on for quite a while unnoticed. He made good money with it. He got caught, but only because he got greedy and bumped up the amount of money so much that it became suspicious and caught the attention. Story 54. We got a dusting of snow on Easter one year, and in the morning there were convincingly sized rabbit prints out the front door, like far larger than an actual rabbit but too small to be a human foot. They looked like they were stamped, but the snow came the night before. We didn't have bunnyfoot stamp money, nor did I ever find such a thing around the house. No one could have gone to the store in the time window, and what store would you go to? I grew up in the bush, so either the Easter Bunny is real or my mom could rob a bank no problem. Story 55. Roberto Cersoletta was a mentally unstable, unemployed Italian man who lived in Rome near Trevi Fountain. Starting in 1968, 6 days a week, every week, he would go to the Trevi Fountain just before dawn and spend 15 minutes raking up, magneting up, or scooping up with his hands thousands of the coins that tourists throw into the fountain every day for good luck. On average, he netted about $1,000 a day doing this. The Roman police knew about him but thought him an eccentric that wasn't really of harm to anyone. And technically he wasn't, as there was no law forbidding what he was doing. The city operating a program wherein workers would once a week go to the fountain to take out all the coins, and the sum was supposed to go to charity, but the lion's share went to Cersoletta. Nobody really cared until 1999 when they passed a law against what Cersoletta was doing, and the city started fining him. But he kept doing it largely because he was a vagrant who gave away or spent most of the money immediately, so there was never much evidence, and the local police were pretty ambivalent about it. It wasn't until 2002 that he was arrested and actually brought up on charges after wading into the fountain one morning, in large part due to the fact that when the Italian media published a story that was rather embarrassing for Rome, that over the course of 34 years, more than $10 million that should have gone to charity instead went into the pockets of some mentally ill vagrant.